Good afternoon, football fans, and welcome to the Seth Joyner Show. We got another great show for you, but my goodness, we are 2 days away from Thursday night football, the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs versus the Houston Texans, and we're literally 5 days away from Week 1 kickoff. Everyone was wondering whether this day would come. With all the uncertainty with COVID, and the NFL season, everyone wondered, but here we are with Week 1 hanging right in the balance. I got a special guest today, my friend, Trey Wingo, 23 years in the sports broadcasting business. I got all kind of stuff here on you, man. I do. I'm like you. I do my research, man.
There you go. It's been fun. And I remember watching you when I was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and the Eagles that one year, 1991. That was the year that Bryce Popp went in and took out Randall Cunningham, and Brad Gable, who went to Baylor, ended up being the starting quarterback that year. And you guys were loaded that year, man, and it just didn't work out. The Cunningham injury Week 1 against the Packers really undermined that entire season.
There's no doubt about it. It was that was a painful season to realize that was probably our best opportunity, our best chance at winning the Super Bowl, and it just didn't work out. Hey, sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
You guys were stacked that year, no question about it.
So, listen, there's a lot of great storylines in the NFL this year. Give me your thoughts on some of these things. You with the COVID going on, how do you personally feel about the season? A lot of people don't think that the NFL is going to make it through a complete season. A lot of people didn't think that we'd be at this point of an NFL season right now.
Well, I was fairly confident that they were going to do whatever they needed to do to get to September 10th, right? When they started talking about preseason, I knew right away they're not playing preseason games. That was just not going to happen. So I'm not surprised that we're here. The challenge is, how do we go on from here, right? Because I got to say the testing process has done really well, and the procedures they put in place have been great. There have been very few positive tests, and they've been isolating those guys and moving through it. I was really concerned, Seth, I don't know if you were, when they started putting the pads on, because all through training camp, you're wearing those devices that tell you when you're 6 feet or less than someone, and they go off, and that's all wonderful. But at the end of the day, blocking and tackling, that has to happen. So I think the best news for the NFL this summer about getting to the start of the season was the way when they put on the pads and the cleats and the helmets, and there wasn't a huge spike in cases. That was the best case scenario. So that's why we're where we are 2 days away from the start of the season. Then the question becomes, okay, you kind of bubbled these guys at training camp, right, at the facility and doing this, but now we're going to do the traveling thing, and now we're going to go to other cities with our team, and we're not going to be nearly as bubbled as we have been. So obviously there's going to be more variables into the equation. I was never under the impression that they weren't going to start. I'm curious to see what happens now going forward.
Well, that's an issue that will continue to be an issue. For me, the biggest question also will be is, what is football going to look like? Yeah. You got, a season that entailed no OTAs. You also have a season that entailed no preseason games. That's been, catastrophic in my opinion for the rookies, because they haven't had an opportunity to show their coaching staffs what they can do, and those moves have been made. The practice roster has been increased to 16 from 10 per team, but we're still rosters have been cut down to 53 as normal. What is football going to look like this year?
It's interesting, right? First of all, this is a great time for a veteran. Like if anybody has sort of been through a couple of seasons already and they were a fringe player or a marginal player, you knew that in more cases than not, those players would probably stick on a roster or a practice squad than a rookie would, because they haven't seen them in games. But it feels like this has sort of been coming for the last couple of years. We've sort of gone away from, hell, you and I remember when there were 6 preseason games, right? 6 preseason games and a 14-game regular season. But I think the last couple of years, there's been such a watering down of the preseason games for most of the starters anyway. It was really about the 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 back-end guys on a roster. And that part of it, I think, has been difficult. what I'm getting at is I think a lot of people have treated the first couple of weeks of the season, I don't want to say exactly like a preseason game, but it's been a little uneven. And I think we'll see a lot of that in September because you know this as a guy who played all those years. If you're a team that has a veteran coach, a veteran quarterback in a system that hasn't changed, and you don't have a lot of turnover, I think you're in a real big advantage this year because there's not a lot of nuances and variables that are going to go into the equation of your football team. Whereas if you have a new quarterback and a new head coach and a bunch of rookies that made your roster, it's going to be a little choppy.
Now, and that's a great segue, to our next topic, because the NFL has hired this year 5 new head coaches. Matt Rule in Carolina with the Panthers, Ron Rivera in Washington with the Washington football team, Joe Judge with the New York Giants, Steven Stefanski with the Cleveland Browns, and Mike McCarthy with Dallas. What would you expect from these organizations with new head coaches, new offensive and new defensive coordinators, some turnover on their rosters? What do you expect from these teams? I mean, Dallas seems to be loaded. It'll be interesting to see what Mike McCarthy can do, with this offense and all these weapons that he has at his disposal. But some of these other teams, it's got to be touch and go as far as what their season is going to look like, not having an entire offseason to actually implement everything that you do in all 3 phases of the game.
Yeah, let's take Dallas aside because they're a whole different discussion for a variety of reasons that are going on there that I think you know what I'm talking about because you're chuckling right now. But, let's take the Carolina Panthers. Matt Rule comes from college, although he did start as an NFL head coach. He brings in Teddy Bridgewater. They get rid of Cam Newton. They're in a very tough division, the NFC South. Their draft, they were the first team, in the common draft era to draft nothing but defensive players because last year they gave up a career worst, or a franchise worst, rather, most points per game. So they didn't even touch the offense in terms of the draft. They're trying to fix that defense. And you well know, Seth, if you're coming off a season where you've had a really lousy defense and then you're trying to play 7 or 8 rookies or get them in the rotation as quickly as possible without the preseason games, that's going to be difficult. I have all the faith in the world in Matt Rule. He's a friend of mine. Obviously, he went to coach at my alma mater after he left the Philly area at Temple. And I think he's going to do great things. I think it's going to be a tough year for the Carolina Panthers. That one, to me, is just there's a lot of cards stacked against him that aren't necessarily things that he can control. But he's the master architect. He turned around Temple and he turned around Baylor after all the scandal that went on down there. I just think this first season for him might be a little rough. Now, in Ron Rivera, you have a coach who has been around the league a long time. But again, there are questions at quarterback. Dwayne Haskins is going to be the starter. It looks like Alex Smith is not going to be on injured reserve to start the season. He's going to be there. But this is a quarterback-driven league. And I just think that any team that has question marks at the quarterback and everything else that's swirling around the Washington football team right now is going to make that very difficult. Stefanski is loaded in Cleveland. I mean, I feel like this is a make-or-break year for Baker Mayfield. I really, really do. Everybody that drafted him, Seth, isn't there. The general manager that drafted him isn't there. The coaches that drafted him aren't there. So this is a real, real big year for Baker Mayfield because you look at their depth chart, they're loaded. They fixed the offensive line through free agency and the draft. They added a couple of tight ends. They just locked up Kareem Hunt to a decent-sized contract today. There are no excuses, for lack of a better term, why that Cleveland offense shouldn't be humming, and it's on Baker Mayfield to make it work.
Well, I'm not going to let you off the hook on the Dallas deal because it's bigger than football when you begin to talk about the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
CeeDee Lamb was huge. They made a lot of moves, signing Everson Griffin to ensure that they've got some pass rush. I forget the other kid's name that's coming off of suspension.
Randy Gregory.
Yeah. On partial suspension. They just seem like they have all the pieces and they should be accomplishing more than what they are.
Yeah.
It seems like, the piece that always seems to get in the way for them is a piece that's not even on the football field. And that seems to be, Jerry Jones. Can he step back? Can he be the deciding piece that's not causing havoc on his roster as far as his coaches are concerned and as far as his players are concerned. Because I think, when he says what he says and he's always in the public eye, that puts pressure on the team. I mean, what other owner do you see post-game doing interviews right outside the locker room?
Yeah. Well, yeah, listen, that's why I said we need to have a whole separate section just to talk about the Dallas Cowboys, all right? So let's deal, first of all, with what you said about Jerry. He is literally the only owner that has a press conference after every game. And, my good friend Mark Schlereth always says it's one thing to hire a coach, it's another thing to empower a coach. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure since Bill Parcells that there's been a coach that Jerry Jones has been willing to empower and let him be everything that he needs to be as the head coach of that franchise. Because everybody in that team knows, well, listen, the coach can say one thing, but I can go talk to Jerry, and if Jerry agrees with me, I don't have to worry about what the coach has to say.
Wow.
That's a problem. That's going to be a problem. But as far as the talent on the field, yeah, they're loaded. They're absolutely loaded, but it is a new head coach with a new system. Although, what's his face? The offensive coordinator is still
Kellen Moore.
Yes, Kellen Moore. Thank you. And that is going to provide a little stability, but, Dak is not happy. It's pretty clear that the Cowboys have found a way, which is remarkable. They almost reverse engineered this thing to perfection, right? They signed tackle La'el Collins to a deal. Now looks like he's going on injured reserve, so he's out. But they signed him. They signed Jalen Smith, the inside linebacker. Great player. They signed him. Then they take care of Amari Cooper, so he doesn't hit free agency, so they could put the tag on Dak. You're supposed to take care of the quarterback first and then worry about all these other positions. And now they've got themselves in a situation where I'm not comparing the talent, but the reality of the situation is the market for quarterback prices has gone way up with the deal for, as I like to call him, Hall of Famer Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. Those are the numbers that are going to be in the conversation now for Dak. And if they could have gotten this thing done before that, it would have been much better for the team. And, we heard throughout the entire negotiation this offseason with Dak and the boys, well, Dak really only wanted to sign a 4-year deal, and the Cowboys were looking for at least 5. Man, Seth, as well as anybody, if it was really about 1 year and that was the only thing that was holding up this negotiation, they'd find a way to work through that. So that tells me that's a convenient way for both sides to sort of dig in. And Dak says, I want to kick the can again when when this contract is up in 4 years, and the Cowboys want long-term stability. But any contract like the Patrick Mahomes contract, it's probably no more than a 5-year contract right now.
Right.
The way it's structured, they're going to have to redo it, and he's going to make more money than the $500 million he's going to make in the deals it's presently constructed. So if that was the thing that both sides were pointing to as the detriment for why it wasn't done, that's a symptom. That's not a cause. There is something else that's going on between Dak and the Cowboys that is rubbing both parties the wrong way, and that's why they're in the situation they're in.
Well, to my delight and every Philadelphia Eagles fans' delight, we love when there's mayhem down there. But let's dig into this contract talk just a little bit further, because I think that Dak and his agent could see into the future a little further ahead than what everybody else wanted to give him credit for. Okay, they were okay with $30 to $35 million a year. And he says, okay, if you want year 5, then I want 40. And everybody chuckled and laughed. Okay. But if you're a franchise quarterback and you're going to lock him up for 5 years, by the time you get to the 5th year, every quarterback darn near is going to be making $40 million a year. So what he was trying to do was ensure that he would be where the numbers were going to be at year 5, rather than trying to play catch up. And I think that that's still a sticking point. But I saw somewhere the other day, Joe Banner, is a hot ticket on Twitter sometimes, and he's got a lot of opinions, a lot of things we disagree with. This is one thing that I do agree with him. He said that, the Cowboys made a mess here, because they're going to have to pay him much more money down the road than what they would have paid him if they would have figured out a way to get the deal done this year. As Patrick Mahomes signs, then Watson signs, and now you're in a situation where those guys have set the market value. What if Dak, God help us if he does. What if Dak takes this team to a Super Bowl and wins a Super Bowl? Now you got to pay him. And it's going to be a lot more than what you ever thought it was going to be.
Listen, he's going to get paid one way or the other, right? If this is his last year in Dallas, then somebody else, you watch how many people will be running to pay this guy, because the one thing you can say about Dak, whether you have issues with some of the things, it was a bad year for him last year, even though he threw for almost 5,000 yards. The offense didn't click on a lot of levels for a variety of reasons. But the one thing that Dak has is he shows up every week. His nickname, his full name is Rain Dakota Prescott, and his mom nicknamed him Dakota or Dak because his favorite TV show was her favorite was called the Wild West Cowboys of Moo Mesa, and the biggest, strongest bull on that show was a bull named Dakota, and that's how he got the name Dak Prescott, Rain Dakota Prescott. He shows up every week. He's never missed a game due to injury. They've held him out once or twice when they wanted to get ready for the playoffs and all that kind of stuff. But he has never been a guy that hasn't answered the bell. So we all know the first and most important ability in football is availability. And he is built to take a pounding. I mean, he's a thick dude, He is like Russell Wilson is short but stocky. He's also built for it. RG3 was long and lean, and he's had some issues. Yeah. Dak can take a pounding. And he's going to get his money either from the Dallas Cowboys or somebody else. And I know someone put a comment down there I saw that said, if the Cowboys are so loaded, why do they need a superstar quarterback? I think it was David. I'd say, David, the Chiefs were loaded and Alex Smith was their quarterback. Then they got Patrick Mahomes. How'd that work out for you? You need a quarterback to win in this league.
I agree. Well, let's segue off the Cowboys, because I'm pretty sure my Eagles listeners, don't want to hear us talk about them. But there's some other big storylines in the NFL. First of all, let's talk about Tom Brady. Can or will he prove that it was him as much as it was Belichick that had success? It seems to me that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are all in across the board. They've got talent at every single position, probably too deep. And I think they have one of the better defensive coordinators in Todd Bowles.
No question.
And these guys are just beginning to learn and understand what it is to run his system. When they get it, where it's just second nature, that team as a whole is going to be extremely dangerous.
Yeah, they really are. And I think it's almost unfair, although everyone's going to do it. I'm going to do it. We're all going to do it. To look at Brady and say, okay, was it you? Or was it the system and Bill Belichick in New England? Because he's 43 now. And I don't care how many avocado ice cream helpings you have and, your pliability and your stretching and your hydrating and all that kind of stuff. You are not the quarterback at 43 that you were at 33. We saw a little bit of that last season from Tom, even though the receiving corps was a nightmare once Josh Gordon was cut and Antonio Brown was released. I mean, the numbers they were putting up when they had those two receivers clearly was a difference. But Tom was not the same guy. And so I think no matter what happens, it's sort of unfair to judge whether or not it was Tom or Bill Moore this year based on this year alone, because he's 43. I mean, we've had quarterbacks play older than that, but we've never had one be a franchise starting quarterback for multiple years at this age. I mean, Brett Favre broke down massively his last couple of years in Minnesota. He has all the weapons. There's no question about it. And obviously getting Gronk back is a huge thing. But I don't know about you, Seth, but I'm really curious as to what Gronk is going to be. It's one thing, as you said, to sort of go through the practices and the mini camps and all that stuff at training camp. But he hasn't played a game in over a year and a half now. Mm-hmm. He's a big, strong guy. Don't get me wrong. But it's one thing to want to play, and it's another thing to cross that sidelines and actually play. And I'm curious to see if he's the same guy, because at the end of his time in New England, you could tell he was physically limited by the injuries piling up. And I'm sure his body feels better now than it has in 10 years. But it probably won't take 3 weeks for that to change, and then how is he going to respond to that? And then you bring in Leonard Fournette, because I find this fascinating, right? I am a big believer in systems, and I'm a big believer in finding parts that fit what you do well. Well, I'm trying to find a time in Bruce Arians' tenure as either a head coach or an offensive coordinator where he ever really had a sort of a bell cow featured power running back. I mean, Bruce is about throwing the ball down the field.
Mm-hmm.
And Leonard brings them something, but I just don't know what he brings them because, Bruce is going to do what Bruce wants to do, and that's force the ball down the field. And I just don't see Leonard Fournette getting 20 to 25 carries a game in that offense.
Well, I can tell you this. I lived in Arizona. I was there through Bruce's tenure. I remember when they brought David Johnson on, and they did run the football. They use him in a myriad of ways, but they did run the football. Bruce likes to throw it, but I think Bruce is smart enough. I've seen him be smart enough to know that if I can dominate the line of scrimmage by running the ball early, and this is the difference between, these newfangled offensive coordinators and an old school guy like Bruce. He realizes and understands that if I want to throw the ball down the field, nothing gives me the best chance for being successful down the field than play action pass, especially with a 43-year-old quarterback. So if I can turn around and hand the ball off, and he's got two good running backs there, if I can turn around and hand the ball off and get 5 yards a clip, 5 yards on first down, let's say, I can go play action pass and do what I want to do on second down. It makes all the sense in the world. As far as Tom Brady is concerned, I will say this. I think one of the main reasons that he left New England is because of what Bill Belichick made him go through last year. They gave him nothing. They gave him nothing at wide receiver. They gave him no protection on the offensive line. And then you wanted him to be Tom Terrific, and I also got my own theory that this was the only way that Bill Belichick could really get him out of New England, because Robert Kraft wanted him to retire as a New England Patriot. So if you give him nothing, and Tom could see it, that this was, Bill's plan to kind of get him out of there, then he's like, peace, I'll see you guys later. Now he doesn't have to be the Tom of old if he's got enough weapons around him, because for the first time in his career, in my opinion, he's got more talent around him than he's ever had. And I always go back to what he said. Guys will always ask him in the media, oh, when are you going to retire? How long are you going to play? And he said, why would I retire now? I got all the answers to the test, which is true. You can't show him anything that he hasn't seen. Now, if they can run the ball and he can go play action pass, even more importantly, when they want to and when they need to throw the ball in bunches, if they can protect him, there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to have another hell of a year.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And there's a lot of things that you just touched on there that I think are really fascinating. Real quickly on Fournette, I agree with you on David Johnson. There's no question, but I think David Johnson's a different kind of running back than Fournette. I've just never seen Fournette sort of be featured. Like David Johnson was a threat coming out of the backfield to catch the ball. No question. I mean, Leonard's going to be that plug-and-play guy, go get 4 or 5 yards. I just don't know if they're going to use him the same way they use David Johnson. The Brady thing is fascinating to me because I don't know if you remember this, but last summer in training camp, 2019, he was basically begging for a new deal. And there was one time at a media scrum after a practice, someone said, hey, what's the deal? Do you have a new contract? And Tom looked at the camera and said, well, don't you think I earned a new contract? So to me, once last season started, once that first game was played, I think it was against the Steelers last year, that first game was played and he didn't have a contract, he was like, I'm out of here. To me, that was the line where Tom was like, you don't even want to offer me a contract before this year? We're moving on. And to your point, remember the last game of Tom Brady's Patriot career, it was that divisional round loss to the Tennessee Titans, or the wild card weekend. Sorry, it was wild card week, to the Tennessee Titans. And that game was 20-14. 20-14. That Patriots offense scored 13 points in that game. 13 points. If you would have told me that the Titans, because remember the last play of the game was a pick six, or the next last play of the game was a pick six. Maybe it was the last game. I don't know. Because they didn't kick the extra point. Yeah, it was the last play. If you would have told me that the Tennessee Titans would go down there and score 14 points, and that would be enough to beat the New England Patriots in Foxborough, I would have said you're crazy. But they had that real bad sequence toward the when they were at the goal line. They had to kick a. I think they had first and goal for one. Did that game, and had a penalty. It was like the first time ever in postseason play at home in Foxborough where they had a first and goal for one that didn't convert it into a touchdown. that offense was anemic last year, and it was not there. And I figured they figured if we could keep the Titans to 14 points, we're probably going to win this game, and they could generate nothing. So to your point, yeah, Tom probably looked around and said, not only did they not offer me a contract when the start of the year, but look what I had to fight with this season, and that wasn't it. It wasn't it.
Well, let's stay in New England because another one of the big storylines is going to be Cam Newton. In your opinion, can he resurrect his career? How does him and Bill Belichick mesh? Because right now, from what I understand, Bill's in love with the guy. He has nothing but great things to say. He's a hard worker, as if Tom Brady isn't a hard worker. He's the first guy in, the last guy out, as if Tom Brady wasn't that guy. But he is singing the praises, and there's a lot of positive things coming out of New England about Cam Newton. And he's another one of those guys that's motivated to kind of thumb his nose at the Carolina Panthers for how they treated him.
Right. Well, it's interesting. One quick thing which I love about Belichick is why he's always playing chess and everybody else is playing checkers. When the penalties came down for them, once again taping something in that game in Cincinnati, the penalty was they lost, besides the cash, they lost a 4th-round pick. So now they go out and get Cam Newton at a song. And if Cam Newton leaves in free agency after this year is done, the compensation, or was it a 3rd-round pick, whatever it was, will be the exact same pick that they lost in that penalty. So Bill is like, you have a Dak's agent always thinking 2 steps ahead. Bill's always thinking that way as well. It is interesting, right? Because I remember when Cam signed there, and there was listening to a couple of radio shows up in Boston, like, do you think Bill's going to be okay with Cam's outfits and his dancing and preening? Because none of his players do that. And I was like, if Bill had a problem with that, he probably wouldn't have signed him. I mean, if that was an issue for Bill, he probably wouldn't have signed him. What Bill does better than anybody, and this is why I think he's the greatest coach of all time, arguably in all sports, is that Bill never says, this is my system and this is what I do. Bill, every week for 16 games, looks at the opposition and says, what do they do poorly that we can exploit? And that's the way he goes through it. My favorite Bill Belichick story of all time, give me a second here. When Brady finally got suspended for the deflation sensation, he got the 4 games that one year. It was either 16 or 16. And Jimmy Garoppolo goes out there, plays great in the first game, they win, and he gets hurt in the second game against Miami. So Jacoby Brissett is now going to be the starting quarterback. That happened on a Sunday at Foxborough, and their game 3 that season was the Houston Texans on Thursday night. Jacoby Brissett was not the quarterback that Jimmy Garoppolo, kind of quarterback, nor the quarterback that Tom Brady was. In that short week, he completely changed the offense that they ran. And I think we ran the numbers on NFL Live that day, and I can't quite remember what it was, but I think they had more design quarterback runs in that game for Jacoby Brissett than they had for the past 10 years for Tom Brady. And that was basically saying, this is what we have now, and this is what I'm going to use. I'm fascinated by the Cam Newton situation in New England because outside of maybe N'Keal Harry clicking in his second year, you can't look at that receiving roster and say, well, they completely upgraded it. And they've had a lot of players opt out this year. I think they led the league with 8, including Dante Hightower, who, as was the quarterback of that defense,
right,
from the linebacking core. And they lost some. I think they lost Lawrence Guy and the other starting linebacker last year. One went to Detroit, and one went to Miami.
Rod Mayo.
Yeah, exactly. So that linebacking unit, they had a nickname. They were the bogeyman. They got people nervous. That entire linebacking core is now gone. So I believe that Bill will find a way to manufacture wins, but I'm not sure if this might be the most depleted overall roster he's had in a long, long time.
You're watching the Seth Joyner Show with my good friend, Trey Wingo. Trey, let's talk about Kansas City because I believe that, the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens seem to be the 2 preeminent teams in the AFC this year. Do you think Kansas City can repeat, or does Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens figure out a way to get over the hump? Because it seems like these 2 teams maybe with and people will say the Tennessee Titans, I'm still not sold 100% personally on Ryan Tannehill. I'm just waiting for, Dr. Jekyll to pop out at any moment.
Yeah.
But it seems like these two teams are going to be the two preeminent teams in the AFC. And it seems like, Lamar Jackson, his biggest hurdle is going to be the Kansas City Chiefs.
No question. And it's interesting, right? Because Peyton Manning retired in 2015 and Tom is moving on and he's 43. You always have those Manning-Brady matchups every year. And I feel like now that matchup is Lamar and Patrick Mahomes. And we should enjoy every one of these situations that we're going to get to see them play out because they are two amazing quarterbacks who do things a little differently than each other, but they're still incredibly talented. Yeah, I do think the Chiefs have a great chance to repeat, Seth, for a couple of reasons. One, they're loaded. Before the opt-outs, I think they were bringing back 22 of 24 starters from the Super Bowl team. And when the offensive lineman, Duvernay Tardif, decided to be a doctor in the COVID crisis, that knocked it down. And then Damian Williams, the running back, opted out. So technically, they have 20 of 24 starters returning from the Super Bowl championship team. But you can make a very compelling argument that Damian Williams probably wasn't going to be the starting quarterback and a running back anyway. When they took Clyde Edwards-Helaire in their first round, the kid out of LSU, and he is, you see Josh Rosen, okay, the quarterback who's bounced around, and now he was just signed by the Bucks,
Mm-hmm.
and he has bounced around and is just ever since going back to college is at different systems and all this kind of stuff. And, the right fit hasn't ever been there for Josh. And at this point, I wonder if it ever will. But you could not drop into Eric Bieniemy and Andy Reid's offense a better running back than what Clyde Edwards-Helaire does. And the way they're going to use him, he only had like 370 carries coming out of LSU. When you talk about some of the other guys had 700 carries in their college careers. So he's got a lot of tread left on the tire. The way Joe Brady used him at LSU last year is almost going to be identical to the way that Eric Bieniemy and Andy Reid are going to use him in Kansas City. I think the Chiefs have the best chance to repeat, not only for those reasons, but also what we talked about at the top of the show. They're a veteran team. They have a system in place with Andy Reid. They have the best player in football in Patrick Mahomes, and everybody's locked up. Tyreek's not going anywhere. Travis is set. Mecole Hardman's still there. They have so many advantages. In fact, the only disadvantage Kansas City has this year is that raucous crowd at Arrowhead.
Mm-hmm.
Playing in that place. It's nuts. And people are going to go in there and not going to have to deal with that part of it anymore. Because of COVID restrictions. But I do think that the Chiefs are more likely to repeat than any other team since the Patriots did it in 38-39 for a variety of reasons. So I'm still really in on the Chiefs. The Ravens thing is interesting because I don't know if there's a team out there in the league that has done a better team construct perspective than what John Harbaugh and everybody has done in Baltimore, because this is what we want to run. This is what we're going to do. And they have put a team in place around them to absolutely run the offense and the things that they want to do to run it. But I'm a big believer that at the end of the day, you see a lot of young running quarterbacks. You never see a lot of old ones. And for the Ravens to become whatever they need to become, we made this big stat last year. We made a big thing of it at ESPN that the Ravens are the first team ever with total balance. They averaged 200 yards rushing and 200 yards passing. Isn't that incredible? It is. But tell me, in this day and age of football, where you're gonna get to a consistent championship level, if you're averaging 200 yards passing a game. I mean, I respect the way they did it last year, and they got behind the eight ball in that game against Tennessee, and they put up some fancy numbers when the game was sort of out of reach. But you have got to find a way to be able to attack down the field a little more consistently in this era of football that we're playing in. And I just think for Lamar and the Ravens to get to where they think they can go, their passing numbers can't be that similar to their rushing numbers.
Well, in my opinion, I think they're coming. I felt like when Lamar Jackson was drafted by the Baltimore Ravens, there was going to be some time to grow.
Yep.
His mechanics were off. the year that he won the Heisman, he was just electric.
Right.
It seemed like he could do no wrong. And then he came back. The team the following year was a little less talented, if you will. So he comes in and, they devise a system that fits his running ability. But I've always felt like there was some growth and some development that needed to continue to prevail. And he was thrown into the midst of just being a starter.
Right.
And I believe as time goes on that he's going to, improve and be a better passer of the football. I think they're still going to try to, be a run-first team, and there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion, because I think that anytime that you can dominate the line of scrimmage, it opens up the rest of your playbook to do whatever it is that you want to do, to any defense. But I think that he'll continue to improve as a passer of the football, and I think they know that. I think the entire, Ravens staff and organization understands that.
Yeah, Hollywood Brown got off to a great start the first couple of weeks of the season last year, the rookie wide receiver out of Oklahoma. And he wasn't the consistent threat that I think they needed him to be, because, he's the definition of a lid lifter, right? There's no question about that. But, they drafted J.K. Dobbins over the draft weekend. So they're going to run the football with Ingram and Dobbins there. You're right. I just think they need to open up the arsenal a little bit and allow him to throw the ball a little bit more, and not just. Look, the tight ends are the tight ends. They're great, and they have a bunch of them, and they're going to throw to all of them. But I think that they need to find a way to get to a more consistent downfield presence in the passing game, and it should be that connection that looked great the first couple of weeks of the season last year when Brown was a rookie and Lamar was just sort of settling in. Those two need to find a little more of a more consistent connection for them. For me, if they're going to challenge what the Chiefs can do with, my God, so many weapons on the offense.
Mm-hmm. Well, lastly, this is a big season. Before we, jump into our Eagles talk, big season for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
The Packers, draft Jordan Love. Aaron's a little ticked off about it because he wants a little more help at the wide receiver position. Is this a make or break year, in your opinion, for Aaron Rodgers? I know that contract-wise, where he is.
Yep.
But I'm sure there's some outs for the Green Bay Packers if they choose to do that. At the end of the day, is this a make or break year for him? Does he have to, improve exponentially for him to get next year? Or was this Jordan Love pick a sign of the times?
Well, it's interesting, right? They were in the NFC Championship game last year, and they got blown out by San Francisco, no doubt about it, but they were there. Make or break, I don't know, but one thing we need to be clear about with the Packers' decision to draft Jordan Love, let's not forget, he just didn't fall to them. They traded back into the first round to get Jordan Love. So it's not like, when Aaron Rodgers was sitting there with the 24th or 25th pick, all those years ago in 2005, and you had to take him because he was sitting there. This was an active move by the Packers to go back into the draft in the first round and get Jordan Love. Mm-hmm. So whether or not he is what he's going to be there, they believe he is, right? You don't make that move unless you are convinced that guy is going to be the next big thing. So Love's an interesting guy, right? Like his senior year or his last year at Utah State wasn't nearly as good as the previous year because there were 10 or 9 different, I think, starters on the offense than the previous year. But he had a ton of interceptions. But he's an interesting body of work. The Packers have never really addressed weapons for Aaron Rodgers through the draft. They've never used a number 1 pick on a wide receiver to help Aaron Rodgers. Now, that's somewhat bogus because that would assume that if you're a first-round pick, you must be a great player. And as you well know, a lot of people that are taken in the first round are nearly as good as the guys that go in the second, third, fourth, and fifth round at times. Devontae Adams, their best receiver, was a second-round pick a few years ago. But they certainly did not do much to give Aaron Rodgers help. They signed they drafted the running back A.J. Dillon out of Boston College. So they already have a couple of running backs there in Aaron Jones. So they're just adding depth at that position. And the one big wide receiver free agent signing, if you want to call it that, was Devin Funchess, and he opted out. So if you're Aaron Rodgers, you are looking around maybe a little bit like Tom Brady last year and going, okay, what are you giving me to work with here? Randall Cobb isn't there anymore. None of those guys are there anymore. Jordy Nelson's not there anymore. So it's really, if you're a fantasy owner, Devontae Adams is going to be a real good pick for you. They don't have a lot to throw to. And if you're Aaron Rodgers, you got to be saying to yourself, man, what are we doing? What's going on here? I don't know if it's a make or break, but look, if they struggle, they make it a lot easier to make that move to the guy that they think is going to be the guy because they went back into the first round to get him.
Well, you listen to the Seth Joyner Show with my friend Trey Wingo today, and one of my viewers just posted in our questions. Jeff Taylor said that they just named Jordan Love the third string quarterback by the coach today. Maybe that speaks volumes as to where the Packers are headed and what all this means. Well, let's jump into some of the Philadelphia Eagles stuff. I know that you've got some ties to the area and you know exactly what's going on here. I've got a couple of my listeners, they want to hear about the Eagles. I guess the 900-pound gorilla in the room right now is the situation with Jason Peters at left tackle. I'm a guy that always reads between the lines of what coaches say and information that gets leaked out. A couple of weeks ago, Jason Peters allegedly came out and said that he was not going to play left tackle unless they bumped him. Yesterday, Doug Peterson announces that Jason Peters came into his office and said that he will play left tackle. And from news sources, there hasn't been any adjustment in his contract, for that move. I don't remember a time in pro football, where a player ever announced to an organization, whether it be conjecture or truth, that, hey, if you want me to play over here, then you got to up me. Normally, you sign a contract, and the coaches can use you where they want to use you. Yeah. Where there's smoke, there's fire, in my opinion. So something happened. Something was said. They found out a way to rectify it, and I'm under the impression that, hey, Jason Peters signed for $3 million to play right guard. He's got another $3 million in incentives to get that number up. Behind the scenes, without anybody knowing it, or whether it comes out later on, I get the impression that $3 million in incentives has been restructured to be in a way that he gets it all to actually be able to move to left tackle.
Wouldn't it be nice if back when you were playing, you could just say, hey, man, I'm going to need a little more to move over here. Player empowerment is something that has been really fun to watch. By the way, luxury, to have Jason Peters come back, because if the Eagles didn't have bad luck, they'd have no luck at all. It has been unbelievable to me to see the number of injuries that have been piling up this offseason and this training camp for them. But I agree with you. I think that something probably was done and was, you can move money in a lot of ways, because the Chiefs, I think, had a less than like $1,000 in cap space before they got the deals done with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. So, it's all funny money. You can manipulate it a bunch of different ways to suit your needs. It's certainly not a hard cap situation. But just the fact that they got him back, to be there for a little, to play guard, and then the injuries pile up the way they do, and to see him be able to slide into the left tackle position is remarkable. And, a lot of eyes are going to be on Carson Wentz this year as well. The idea, whether it's fair or not, and we talked about it with Dak, is can you stay on the field? And it's almost unfortunate because, like, last year, I don't think people truly understand what he was working with down the stretch of the season in terms of the results. And to get those guys going and get him into the postseason was absolutely remarkable. And, the numbers that he put up with those guys, you go back to the 2016 season when it was all clicking before the injury, obviously against the Rams, or 2017 season, excuse me. And, that changed everything. He was on an MVP pace that season. And they tried, the kid Jalen Reagor. Now he's going to be playing week 2, isn't that over here? Week 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they went out and got the runner, the sprinter, Marquise Goodwin, and obviously he got hurt, or he opted out. He opted out. So there's going to be an upgrade, and they tried to really, really address the situation. And people started trying to compare the Jalen Hurts thing to the Jordan Love thing. And I was like, well, wait a minute. You did take a receiver in the first round in Jalen Reagor, who a lot of people were really high on him going into the draft. So you did that. You also did get Goodwin, who was a speedster. Now, obviously, he opted out. And then you have a couple of other receivers coming back. So I don't look at it the same way as how can you waste a second-round pick on Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen Hurts was one of the better players in college football last year, and the Eagles are thinking to find a way to get him on the field. And let's be honest, Carson Wentz has been hurt a lot. And we have a dynamic player who can run and throw. I mean, my God, the Jalen Hurts we saw at Alabama as opposed to the Jalen Hurts we saw at Oklahoma, those were two different quarterbacks. Now, I get it. You can have your Big 12 defenses conversation there if you want. But at the end of the day, when he was put in an offense to spin it, he was able to spin it. And he also was very functional running it against arguably the best defensive conference in football in the SEC. I didn't have a problem with the Jalen Hurts thing because it made sense to me because I understood what the Eagles were doing from a team construct point. We used the first-round pick and a wide receiver on a very rich wide receiver draft. We got one in free agency, and we got some others coming back from injuries who weren't with us last year. So I didn't have a problem with the Jalen Hurts thing. Did you?
Well, I kind of scratched my head because I think, when you're talking about at second round and at the number that they drafted him, let's honestly talk about it. More times than not, when you draft a player that high, you're looking for production right out of the gate. I don't see any return on investment as far as Jalen Hurts is concerned this year, and even more so because you haven't had any offseason. I mean, he's learning the position on the fly. He's doing some great things in camp, but if Carson goes down, I think the moves they made with locking Josh McCown into the practice squad and paying him $12,000 a week to be at their beck and call if they need him back.
Yeah,
that speaks to that whole situation, and also the situation that you still got Nate Sudfeld who may not be effective, but you have a guy who knows the system backwards and forwards. So you still got two guys that's hanging around. One of them, is a just in case. One of them's on your roster, and your second round pick, you spent that on a guy that you probably won't get much production out of this year.
Yeah, unless they use him the way the Saints have used their sort of gadget in New Orleans, right? And the thing that people forget about Jalen Hurts is that he is a strong, strong dude. I mean, there was video of him, I think, on their max day at Oklahoma where he squatted a ridiculous amount of weight, and he was a power lifter. He was a power lifter in high school. I think now they're not going to use him like as a gunner. They're not going to use him the way they do.
Right.
Do that, but I think they're going to find ways to put him on the field, and I think there's going to be times where you're going to have Jalen and Wentz on the field at the same time. Now, what you're saying makes all the sense in the world, but it always comes down to the premise is where did we have him on our board, and he's still there when we thought he might not be there, and he's an interesting football player. Like he's not just a one-trick pony. I think he's a really interesting guy that they might try to use in a bunch of different ways to create multiple confusions, set some confusions maybe for the defensive side of the ball. I think he's going to be on the field a little more than people think.
Well, I personally, I scratched my head when the pick was made, but from what I'm hearing, I think that, I'm willing to give the Eagles the benefit of the doubt to see what it is that they actually do with him. I want to go back and talk about Carson Wentz a little bit because, he is the preeminent guy. He is the franchise quarterback in this organization. And, you talked about being available early. You talked about Dak Prescott and his ability to be available. And in my opinion, I think, this is more fallacy than it is necessarily the fact that Carson Wentz is injury prone. And I'll tell you why. He tears his ACL and his MCL against the Rams, and I think it was week 13 or week 12, okay? The type of play that he got injured on, he got injured selling out.
Yep.
He wasn't standing in the pocket and nobody hit him in his knee. He got injured, doing what he does. He gets the surgery. The Eagles win the Super Bowl. They come back, and the Eagles are off to a bad start, 1-2, 1-3. He's chomping at the bit because he wants to show everybody, that I'm the franchise quarterback, not Nick Foles. And, they rush him back. He goes out and he's complaining about, my back isn't right. Something's wrong with my back, and they run a bunch of scans. They can't find out what is really going on. It's not until the third scan or so that they realize, there's some calcification here. Well, the calcification is indicative of the fact that something was broke and it's now healing. So all of this time, he's been making compensations and he's hurt himself, okay, and it went undetected. Now, you shut him down. You have to. He's got a broken back, okay? Is that injury prone? You rushed him back, in my opinion, and that sped up the process of the back injury because he wasn't ready. He didn't even have a full year to heal. And those types of injuries usually take that long. The last thing is, they go into the playoffs. He gives you 16 games last year, okay, for the first time in his career. And he gets into the playoffs, takes a cheap shot in the back of the head. And in today's NFL, once you get your bell rung, once you go in the blue tent and they take your helmet, your day is over, okay? So now everybody wants to say, he's injury prone. He can't stay healthy. Come on. Let's look at the facts as what they are. He had a bad injury. He got rushed back. He got an injury based upon, him being back and making compensations because he wasn't ready. And then he got an illegal hit to the head and he got concussed. And now all of a sudden, the guy's injury prone. I don't buy that.
No, that's fair. I mean, the only thing I would say is at the end of the day, like my friend Herm Edwards used to say this all the time. Like RG3 once broke his arm and he was running down the sidelines. And literally the guy was coming at him when he was with the Browns. All he literally had to do was step out of bounds and it wouldn't have happened and he wouldn't have broken his leg or his arm, rather. Herm always had know when the journey is over. And for Carson's well-being, and it's the fine line that we always talk about, right? I can make these plays because I've made them my whole life and I want to do it because they're special, they're wow, and they help the team. And that's great. But at the end of the day, sometimes 90% of those situations are better than 100% of those situations. Everything you said is exactly right. But we've got to make sure that Carson doesn't expose himself to any unnecessary risks because the Eagles could be really good this year. I think they could be. I mean, listen, it's between the Cowboys and the Eagles. The rest of the division, I don't think that's a change. And I think that Carson needs to understand the best way you can help that team is make sure that you are on the field in week 1 and you're on the field in week 8. And that's my only thing that I would say. I don't believe it's an injury bug thing with him or anything like that. Let's just make sure I limit the shots that I have to take as the starting quarterback.
Well, and I think that at the end of the season last year, when you talked about what he had to deal with and what he had to work with, I think you begin to see him make smarter decisions outside of the pocket. And I thought I saw him make the right reads and throw the ball to the guy that was in the progression where he was supposed to give it to him. And I thought that, he made great strides in taking over, the leadership role as the unsung, leader of this football team. But there are still people that question that, and my deal was, what are you guys watching? Now you fast forward to this year and you look at all the talent that he has around him and all the experience that he has and his understanding that, he's the preeminent guy that must be on the field and must be there in order for the Eagles to be successful. And you got to know when to take a hit, when not to take a hit, when to lay down and, and realize that the defense is one, punt the ball, let your defense do what it has to do. And then you get the ball back and then you go, he's got plenty of weapons at his disposal. The big question is now, can he take all of these weapons that are around him and elevate his game to the next level and get back to, 2017, where he was almost a lock to win the MVP.
Yeah, you're right. That's the only thing. And it's the hardest thing to do. Like Steve Young talked about it, the Hall of Fame quarterback. Like, why should I stop running? Why should I do all these things when they've always worked for me? And he never became the player he was and the passer he was until he realized, all right, sometimes just don't do that. Don't dirt it a little bit, and things might work out a little bit better. So yeah, I just it's the finest line and it's the hardest line, because those are the things that have made you great. Your incredible athleticism is the things that have allowed. Like, I remember that one year, I think it was 2017, twice against the Reds. Now the Washington football team. Then, he looked like he was dead in the water, and somehow he got away from that and threw it, and it was a great play. And when you see those plays and you can make them and they've worked, it's hard for you to say, I got to throttle that in, because that's the one thing that's always sort of separated me. But everybody's an athlete in the NFL. Everybody is really, really good, and eventually it just takes that one pop and you're done.
Well, I think one of the things that at the end of the day really concerns me about this Philadelphia Eagles team is the wide array of injuries that has been problematic for the last 3 or 4 years. Brooks on IR, torn Achilles.
Yeah.
Willett, torn biceps or triceps, done for the year. Lane Johnson has been in and out of practice all training camp. Then your number one draft pick, the wide receiver, Jalen Reagor, is a guy that's slated not to be available week 1, possibly week 2. Everyone has to deal with injuries in the NFL, but it seems like for the last 3 or 4 years, the Eagles have just been inundated with them, and they've changed, medical staffs and training staffs, and and they just cannot get away from the injuries. And to me, that not the amount of talent that they have on the team, because that speaks for itself. I think the thing that's most troublesome for me is their success is going to depend on, more than anything, their ability to stay healthy, and they just can't stay healthy.
Yeah, I guess the only hope you have is maybe it all ran out this summer, right? Maybe all the freak stuff that sometimes happens over a 16-game season, maybe it was condensed into the training camp situation for the Eagles. But you're right. I said it earlier. If they didn't have bad luck, they'd have no luck when it came to the injuries. So the only good luck was that Jason Peters was there, right? He was able to step in and do that. But it has bbeen something that, like, every time I turned on something or checked something, it was like, man, another Eagle went down. And none of them were Carson Wentz. So we're hopeful for the Eagles fans out there, and I'm sure that's a lot of people watching. All of this has been done in the summer, and we'll have an uneventful fall and into the early winter with this team.
You watching the Seth Joyner show with my guest, Trey Wingo. For you guys that are watching and you guys are posting a lot of questions, the content is organic. Trey and I are just going to roll with it. But after the show is over, I'll jump on social media and I'll answer some of you guys' questions. Let's jump over to the defense before I let you get out of here. Yep. This defense should be vastly, vastly improved over what we saw last year. Slay solidifies, the one cornerback position. Sidney Jones, Rasul Douglas now are guys that are no longer on the roster. I like Avonte Maddox, on the other side. I think he's better suited to play outside, and I thought it was a big mistake for them to move him inside last year. They add Javon Hargraves at defensive tackle, so now Fletcher Cox has got some help. Malik Jackson is now healthy. You got guys in that middle that can really, really make this defensive line dominant. The only position that really worries me on the defensive side of the ball, some people would say the linebackers, other people would say, hey, the defensive ends. You've got some linebackers that, special teams players, and there's not a lot of proof of productivity there. But I think that this team, Jim Schwartz, likes a team that's built on the strength of their defensive line. I'm concerned at the defensive end position more than anything, because you don't get consistent, solid pressure out of those two positions, no matter whether the starters are in or whether you got the backups that in and you are in, and you can get all the push up the middle that you want to, but if you can't get guys on the outside to bring pressure when you get pushed up the middle, that, to me, that's a problem. That's a big problem.
You're right, and that's why it was such a big deal that the Cowboys were able to sign Everson Griffin, because now you have both ends of that defensive line covered. I do like the addition of Malik Jackson. I thought that was a really good pickup for them. It's a big year for Derek Barnett, though. This is a guy they drafted in the first round a few years ago, and he really needs to go out there and plant a flag this year and say, this is why you got me where you got me, because that's the promise. He's been good, but not great. And in that situation, in this position, and to the things you talk about, he needs to be great this year.
The other position I'll be looking at very intently is the strong safety position. Jalen Mills moves from cornerback to strong safety. Will Parks is a guy that they were probably counting on to play a big role. He's now on injured reserve. The rookie that they drafted from Clemson, Kayvon Wallace, is a guy that has to step up in a backup role. What do you think about the cornerbacks, and what do you think about the safeties and what all that means?
Well, you know how this goes, Seth. Those safeties and cornerbacks can be great, but as you alluded to, if we're not getting pressure off the edge, it may not matter, right? I mean,
right.
You can have the greatest safeties and cornerbacks out there, but at the end of the day, if that quarterback has 4 or 5 seconds to throw with the way the game is called right now, it doesn't matter. You're not going to stick with those guys for that long. So to me, it's all about pressure, and finding ways to dial that pressure up, because you could have Deion Sanders or Darren Woodson or Bobby Taylor, those guys all back there. And if you can't get a pass rush, even those guys are going to get abused a little bit. So I think, obviously, with the way it's been the last couple of years, there's some questions there. And they got Nickel Roby-Coleman as well coming over from the Rams. But at the end of the day, those cornerbacks and safeties will be as good as the pressure allows them to be.
Well, before I let you go, projection time. Tell me, what do you think the Eagles season will look like? What the division will look like? I think that I agree with you that the division is going to come down to, the Eagles and the Cowboys once again. What do you feel about the playoffs, their chances for the playoffs? And give me a record prediction.
It's a 2-team division. We talked about that before. The Cowboys, on paper, they look great. But recently, the paper has been the best part of it, right? I've seen the Eagles cut it out. I've seen the Eagles do things that people said you can't do with a lot of that same roster there, whether it was find a way to make the postseason last year with the lack of any playmakers at wide receiver, or the year they won the Super Bowl with a backup quarterback. There's just something about this team that is scrappy and tough that I like, and I'm going to have to see it from the Cowboys before I believe it. So I think the Eagles, at 10-6, probably win the division.
Great. Awesome stuff. Hey, man, I tell my guests every single week that our most valuable commodity is our time. My friend, I appreciate an hour of yours. Great talking with you. Much success to you, and I look forward to chatting with you again, and maybe teeing it up when you get some time.
Let's go, partner. That would be great. Always good to talk to you, Seth, man. Thank you,
my friend. Hey, listeners, next week we'll be back with another show for you. Eagles Washington game will be in the books. I look forward to it. Like I said, I will be on social media in a little bit to answer some of you guys' questions. In a couple of weeks, we'll do a Talk to Us Tuesday, where it's just you and me and your questions. Until next week, I thank my guest, Trey Wingo, my producers, Derek Stevenson, and my producer, Tom Schrader. Until next week, hey, take care of each other, love each other, be good to one another. Peace.